The journey back to Outpost 6 was surprisingly calm. There had been little effort to chase after the attackers, as the bulk of the Saldana garrison had been standing guard either at the spaceport or at City Hall, with the remainder of the on-duty warriors joining the motorcade itself. Off-duty personnel were doubtlessly being scrambled, but by the time they reached the attack site, the rebels would be long gone. Caspian had chosen to return to the outpost the same way as most of the others, via civilian transportation. He jumped down from the trailer of the cargo truck that served as one of the squadron's impromptu battle mech carriers, satisfied that his fire starter was properly stowed, hidden behind a screen of wooden crates. The truck would take the fastest route to the outpost while the infantry slowly filtered back one by one, reducing their chances of being detected and traced. Caspian had taken the opportunity to change back into his civilian clothes, disarming himself save for a concealed laser pistol that he carried beneath his leather jacket. He was joined beside the trailer by Sullivan Chu, the mech warrior who owned the Shadowhawk.
"Well, Captain," said Sullivan with a grin, "I'd call that a sizable success."
Caspian returned the smile. Sullivan was a recent addition to the ranks of Mage Squadron, a middle-aged former mercenary with contagious optimism. His face was scarred, but in a conveniently appealing pattern that only served to further accentuate his features. His dark hair and beard were both trimmed short, with scattered flecks of gray. He looked like a man who had missed his calling, eschewing the glamour of Holovid's stardom in favor of serving as a soldier of fortune. Caspian suppressed a wince as the older mech warrior slapped his back with enough force to shift him a pace forward.
"Definitely got our point across," he said. "The Grim isn't going to be happy when she sees the damage." "She's the quartermaster," said Sullivan. "Worrying about damage is her job."
Caspian sighed. "I know. She voted against this strike, though."
"You think she'll give you an earful?" asked Sullivan.
"Worse," Caspian replied. "She'll give me the cold shoulder, the silent treatment." Sullivan flinched and gave a low whistle.
"I dated a woman like that once," he said. "Did something that upset her one night. Woke up the next morning handcuffed to my bed. She'd robbed me blind and run off with most of my stuff."
He exhaled sharply through his nose and gazed upward, as if recalling pleasant memories.
"She was more frustrating than the plot of a Kojimata holo film, but if you could have seen her—"
"I get the picture," said Caspian, fighting back the mental image that threatened to spring into his mind. "Luckily, Grim's not the thieving kind."
"Or maybe not, but she strikes me as the handcuffing type."
Caspian's eyebrows shot upward, and he gave Sullivan a look caught somewhere between confusion and disgust. "You know, there are days where I wonder what's going on inside that skull of yours," he said. "Then there are days like today when I decide that I don't want to know." Sullivan shrugged, still grinning.
"I can't help it if I've had more fun in my time than you have."
Caspian didn't reply. He slapped the side of the trailer, signaling the driver. The truck pulled away, leaving the two mech warriors behind. 3 minutes later, a new vehicle appeared on the road and pulled itself to the curb, a humble 4-door sedan. The driver wasn't a member of Mage Squadron. He was a civilian, but no less loyal to their cause. Caspian took the passenger seat, while Sullivan climbed into the back. The driver sped away, carrying them in a different direction than the trucks had taken.
"How are things in the city, Roy?" asked Caspian.
The driver, a stone-faced old man named Roy Hawkins, glanced sideways at Caspian.
"You kicked the wasp's nest," he said. "It's practically a panic back there. Traffic is backed up for miles. Clanners are tearing those high-rises apart. They're going door to door through the whole block. Rumor is at least 2 people have been shot."
"I was afraid of that," said Sullivan. "An attack this big is sure to generate some reprisals." "No," said Caspian. "They wouldn't be reprisals. The clans don't work that way. But if a soldier bursts into a room expecting to find the enemy and spots someone holding a datapad the wrong way, well, accidents can happen."
"Won't help their public image," said Roy. "A.J. Cooper's paper is still making the rounds. His next article's bound to get people riled up." He shook his head. "I'm amazed that he's even still writing. The wolves should have torn him apart by now."
"Thanks to a little help from Lars and a handful of couriers, they haven't been able to find him," said Caspian. "Which reminds me, you got the notes for tomorrow's pickup?"
32nd Street at 0645, answered Roy. "Same round as usual. Why?"
Your passenger's going to be carrying that article on a data disk, said Caspian. He's got to make it to us before 0800 so we can broadcast it properly. The sooner we get ahead of the clan's propaganda, the better. Sullivan chuckled. Wonder how they'll spin it this time, he mused. If they're smart, they won't spin it at all, said Roy. Everyone remembers the old Combine broadcasts all too well. Nobody believes anything they hear from the authorized sources anymore. If they wanted to get people to believe them, then they'd need to spend a few years actually being honest. An honest clanner? Caspian scoffed. That'll be the day. Mount Hespelan's snow cap would have to melt first. The car fell silent as the conversation drifted away. Caspian turned his attention to the view rushing past his window. The road wound through the forests that surrounded Saldana, a dense maze of coniferous trees and nearly impassable undergrowth. In the days of the Republic, it had been a favorite hunting spot for the locals, a place where the rare Lothanian moose was known to mate during the winters. It had been 6 years since Caspian had last gone hunting. For a moment he entertained the idea of giving it another go this season. Snow had been falling off and on for the past few weeks, and the rut was bound to begin soon, but he dismissed the notion. Even if he could find the time, the forests weren't what they had once been. The moose had migrated further away from the city, fleeing the incessant skirmishes and ambushes that took place in and around the woods. Elementals regularly patrolled the area, still searching for the elusive entrance to Outpost 6, and their presence had made casual morning strolls a thing of the past. Looks like snow, said Sullivan, idly watching the overcast roll across the sky. Winter actually syncs up with Christmas this year, added Roy. It's been a while since we had snow at Christmas time. Radio station switched over yet? Asked Caspian. Not yet, said Roy. They tend to wait until November ends these days. Don't worry, you'll be drowning in half-assed covers of ancient classics before you know it. I don't think they'll be playing the songs at all this year, said Sullivan. WDFA 95 is getting subsumed by the Merchant Cast. They announced it on a broadcast about a week ago. Lothan Capital Trust sponsored the station, and now they've been incorporated. The clan now directly controls the station's resources, so they took the extra step and snagged control of the airwaves, too. Roy sighed. Man, I don't even want to know what kind of music clanners listen to. I don't think the wolves even know what music is, said Sullivan. They just listen to some monotone tube baby recite their poor man's Beowulf, the remittance, or whatever they call it. The remembrance, said Caspian softly, still watching the trees as they sped by. Yeah, that thing. Well, it's the closest thing they've got to poetry. Probably the closest they have to music, too. Today might be the last free broadcast, then, said Roy. If it is, then I don't want to miss it. He reached down and pressed the switch for the vehicle's sound system, then twisted the tuning knob until he could hear the DJ's voice coming over the speakers.
And now the weather. A cold front has been steadily moving its way up the east coast, and it looks like this one is going to finish off the last of the fall weather, so get your outdoor things indoors before Saturday unless you want to dig them out of a foot of snow. In local news, the terrorist group known as the Mages carried out another attack in Saldana this afternoon, hitting Star Colonel Thomas Moran's convoy shortly after his arrival. The Star Colonel had been visiting Lothan in the hopes of bringing an end to the bloodshed, but it seems that his agenda got off to a rocky start. The attack claimed the lives of 12, including Star Captain Christina Danvers and 3 civilians, Chuck Gleason, age 37, Miranda Kerrigan, age 28, and most tragically Catherine Hasegawa, only 15 years of age. Highway 97 has been closed down and is awaiting repairs. The investigation is still ongoing, but to our knowledge, no arrests have been made thus far. Star Colonel Moran declined to be questioned regarding this event, stating only that the clan will present an official statement sometime tomorrow, but his aide Damien had this to say.
A new voice came over the radio, a young masculine voice with a light, almost airy quality to it.
It is a deeply regrettable situation. Our visit was meant to provide Lothan with a sense of peace, to ease the tensions that have held this world captive for far too long. As usual, it seems that the mages are determined to carry on with their imagined war, and as always, it is the innocent who suffer as a result.
Snake, Sullivan growled. They can't get their warriors to learn basic trigger discipline. They kill a couple people and some poor little girl, and then they've got the gall to turn around and blame us for it. Optics. said Caspian wearily. Different crap, same stink. Kurita handled things the same way. The announcer continued.
In sports, the Saldana Sluggers were eliminated from the playoffs yesterday after losing 10-7 to the Auburn Mountaineers. After a brutal slog of a game with neither team able to pull much of a lead, the Mountaineers upset the balance by landing a grand slam in the bottom of the 8th inning. Robbie Martinson made one of the fastest pitches of the entire season, but the Mountaineers' newest player, Terrence, was more than a match for Martinson's infamous fastball. The Sluggers appealed to the referees over allowing a clan elemental onto the field, particularly so late in a championship game, but their final ruling was to let the play stand. A small riot erupted in the stands, with several fans choosing to settle their differences on the field. Law enforcement managed to contain the situation, and the game concluded after a final uneventful 9th inning.
Unbelievable, Roy muttered. If any of our players were even suspected of running stims, they'd be ejected without a second thought. But Auburn can bring in a tube-grown gorilla and they're just fine with it.
You're listening to WDFA 95,
said the DJ.
The time is now 1855 local, 2350 Terran. Our new benefactors are concluding our broadcast day early this evening, and tomorrow we will be under new management. This is Roger Robertson, and tonight is my final night at WDFA. It's been a pleasure to serve the Saldana area for the past 26 years, and...
There was a sudden pause in his speech, and when he resumed speaking, there was an uncharacteristic tightness in his voice.
I just want all of you to know that if I could go back and do it all again, I wouldn't a heartbeat, and I wouldn't change a thing. We've taken in hundreds of requests for our final song tonight, but I hope you'll forgive me if I pick one of my old favorites instead. A lot of you voted for this one, but as for the rest, well, I ask you to indulge this old radio jockey just this once. Here's Resay by Jimmy and the Drakes.
The gentle sounds of an acoustic guitar drifted whimsically through the car, evoking a palpable sense of nostalgia. The soothing voice of Jimmy Drake crooned the lyrics, and none of the occupants spoke a word. It was an old romantic ballad, a confession of love for the titular Resay. The lyrics were in Swedenese, a unique dialect that had once dominated the Rosselhag military district during the days of Curitan rule. During the Ronin War, a stigma against the hybrid language had arisen, and the song had been banned for the Japanese name of its heroine, but in time the public had called for its return. After the war concluded and anti-Curitan sentiments began to simmer back down, the old classic had been allowed to return to the airwaves, and record stores experienced an explosion of orders for the album. Caspian and Sullivan listened to the song in stoic silence, but Roy was visibly struggling. He clung to the steering wheel like a lifeline, his lips pulled tight and his eyes blinking rapidly. As the final chords drifted through their ears, he loudly cleared his throat. "Damn it," he said. "Wolves won't rest until they've taken everything away from us," said Caspian, "no matter how small." "That was Jacob's favorite song," said Roy. "My son, that is. Never could get him to quit playing that damn thing. Never thought I'd be sad to hear it go." "Where is he now?" asked Sullivan. "He died at Kandalaksha," Roy replied. "And they shot him in the back while he ran for the last dropship." Caspian winced and clenched his hands into fists. He had been in the rearguard at Kandalaksha along with the rest of his lance. It had been his job to keep the others from being gunned down as they retreated, but the enemy had been far too strong, too numerous to hold back. He tried to avoid the thought, but the guilt was inescapable. He had failed. Jacob's death was his fault.
"And that concludes our broadcast for today,"
said the DJ.
"Thank you all so much for your years of steadfast support. It's been a pleasure unlike any other to have been your host. Until next time, this is Roger Robertson on behalf of WDFA 95 signing off. Good night, Saldana. God bless."
Static took over the radio. The riders let it wash over them for a moment. Then Roy reached out and switched it off. "That song," he muttered. "That damn song." No further words were exchanged during the ride. A few minutes later they arrived at their destination, a small bridge that crossed over a gentle brook. Caspian and Sullivan exited the sedan, nodded their thanks to Roy, then descended the bank and crept under the bridge. Beneath the structure there was a simple culvert which carried water through the concrete supports. The two men crawled inside on their hands and knees, then took a sharp right. A hidden gap opened into a wider cavern with a circular steel hatch in the floor. Caspian pulled a small remote from his pocket and pressed the center switch. The hatch opened with the hiss of equalized air pressure, and the hatch popped slightly upward. There was a whiff of stale air that made Sullivan cough in disapproval. Caspian pulled the hatch open, revealing a ladder that dove downward into a dimly illuminated corridor. He descended quickly with Sullivan close behind. As they made their way downward, Sullivan pulled the hatch closed behind them, and it locked itself back into place with a firm clunk. The underground passage was shockingly large, with enough space for a 2-lane highway. Lights were strategically placed every few meters, and the tunnel stretched out beyond the range of unaided eyesight in either direction. It was one of many. The entire forest was threaded with similar tunnels, a web of labyrinthine corridors that extended from the center in dizzying fractal patterns. This was the path to Outpost 6, just one entrance among dozens, each one uniquely hidden and different in scale. Some entrances were crawlways hidden within hollow stumps in the woods above. Others were large enough for vehicles to pass through and were hidden in more technical ways. The trucks that carried the Firestarter and Shadowhawk would enter the tunnels through a false cliff face on a secluded highway, then use a codebook to navigate the tunnel, ignoring the deliberately misleading navigation signs that dotted the junctions. Outpost 6 was an impressive fortification, a recent construction built in the aftermath of the Ronin War. It had been intended as a place of refuge for insurgents in the event of a Curitan reconquest, a base of operations from which a force could hold out until the Kungsarmé could organize a counterattack. Its builders could never have imagined the threat posed by the clans, but nevertheless, their work was serving its intended purpose. A Packrat APC awaited Caspian and Sullivan at the bottom of the ladder, its engine reverberating loudly in the echoing space. Caspian caught the smiling face of Halvar peeking through the reinforced windshield, and he waved a greeting. The rear doors slid open, and the two mech warriors wasted no time climbing inside. Halvar was isolated in the driver's compartment, but his older brother, Bjorn, was manning the weapons station in the rear. He nodded a greeting to Caspian, but avoided eye contact with Sullivan.
"Captain," said Bjorn.
The Packrat began to roll, making a wide turn in the passage and heading back in the direction it had come. Caspian settled into one of the jump seats and grunted. The APC was far from a smooth ride. It bumped and jostled even on a flat road, and he struggled to keep his teeth from rattling. There wasn't much talk on the way back, partially from the shuddering of the vehicle, and partially from the awkward tension. Sullivan and Bjorn never spoke to one another if they could avoid it. Bjorn was a veteran of the Ronin War, and he held a dim view of mercenaries as a result. Many companies had been contracted in the early days of the war to drive out the Ronin, while the natal Kungsarmé built up its strength, but over half had taken advance payments and run, leaving the understrength army to fend for itself. The betrayal still burned hot in the hearts of many, and Bjorn's distrust was particularly fierce. The journey to Outpost 6 passed quickly enough, and when they finally emerged from the tunnels into the center of the web, they were met with a buzz of activity. The inner sanctum of Outpost 6 had been hewn out of a deep cavern, and the ceiling rose high above like the peak of a stony cathedral. A ring of concrete walls sat at the center of the cave, and all around the perimeter were the tunnel exits. Men and women were filtering through these openings, some on foot and others in small civilian vehicles. One girl rode a bicycle past the Packrat and waved at Halvar as he drove by. Up ahead, sitting just outside the main gate, sat the mech carriers, and the technicians had already busied themselves with offloading the war machines and inspecting the damage. Halvar drove the Packrat alongside the trucks and shut down the engine, allowing Caspian and Sullivan to disembark. Sullivan emerged and wasted no time. He slapped Caspian's back and took his leave, making a beeline for his battle mech. Caspian watched him go, then took a deep breath and walked toward the crowd of mechanics. Amberly was waiting for him there, her long dark hair pulled back and tied up away from her face. Her arms were folded across her chest. She wasn't scowling, but she wasn't smiling either. and Caspian figured that to be just as bad, if not worse. "How'd it go?" she asked as he drew within earshot. "Smoothly," Caspian replied. "Smooth as anyone could ever hope for." Amberly nodded slowly. "Danvers?" "Dead," Caspian confirmed. "That makes 4. "Good." She turned away from him and took to examining a data pad that she pulled from her coat pocket, apparently finished with the conversation. "That's it?" asked Caspian. "I've got a lot of work to do, Caspian," said Amberly. Her voice was sharp. "You can tell me your war story later." "Grim, Not now." "Damn it, Grim!" Caspian took hold of her shoulders and spun her around to face him. He stood a head taller than her, and when their eyes met there was an awkward moment of silence. Caspian let his hands fall away. "Let's not do this," he said. "Do what?" asked Amberly. "This," Caspian replied, waving his hand to indicate the pair of them. "This silent treatment thing you do whenever you're angry at me." "Don't know what you're talking about," said Amberly, turning away. "I know you didn't think this strike was a good idea," Caspian continued. "We went back and forth on it for days." "Your mind was made up before we started any of that," said Amberly. "Now I've got to clean up after the whole thing, so if you'll excuse me." She took a step away, but froze as Caspian barked after her.
"Lieutenant Grimm's daughter! Front and center!"
A hush fell across the entire outpost. Everyone within earshot stopped what they were doing and stared. Amberly stiffened, then turned on her heel, snapped to attention, and saluted. "Sir!" Caspian returned the salute, took a quick look at the gawkers, and waved his arm. "I call for the whole squadron, as you were." The others went back to their tasks with nervous enthusiasm. Caspian heaved a sigh and turned back to Amberly. He hated pulling rank, especially with her. His gut tied itself in a knot, but he forced himself to look her in the eyes. Amberly's face was placid, but her eyes were wide. Whether from anger or surprise at the outburst, Caspian couldn't tell. She was always difficult to read, at least for him. "Lieutenant?" he began, then hesitated. "Amberly, I need you to understand me on this." "I do understand," she insisted. "You wanted to put on a big show, make the clanners scared to go outside."
"They need to understand that this place doesn't belong to them," said Caspian. "We can't just let them come and go as they please. They need to know that we can strike them anywhere, at any time. Making them as miserable and afraid as possible is our primary purpose. Morale is the one true weapon we have in this fight."
"You attacked a star colonel," said Amberly. "I think they've got the message. So now they'll swoop in with a dozen legions of fresh troops and conquer Lothan all over again. You've made us too high profile, just like I warned you about."
"And I listened," said Caspian. "I listened, and I agreed that there was likely to be a response."
"Then why did you do it?" Amberly demanded.
"Because it needed to be done!"
Caspian snapped. He stopped himself short, squinted, pinched the bridge of his nose, and ran a hand through his hair. "If we spent all our time worrying about what the wolves will do in response to our actions, then we'd never do anything." He took a step forward and closed the distance between them. Amberly didn't shrink from his advance, but she appeared just a bit smaller. She was still at attention, but with less rigidity. Caspian continued. "I know you think I ignored your advice. I promise you that I didn't. I knew the risks. It's been done. Now we have to prepare for whatever comes next. Right now, I need you on my side. I can't run this show without your support. You know that. Please, don't make me pull rank like this again." Amberly's gaze fell to her boots. She changed stances, let her shoulders droop, and sighed. "Look, Caspian," she said. "I don't mean to be a pain. I'm sorry. It's just that I'm worried. Worrying is my job. There's so many people in Maid Squadron now, more than either of us are used to commanding. They depend on us to make the right calls. If we screw up..." "I know," said Caspian, trying not to think about the civilians whose names had been mentioned during the radio broadcast. "Believe me, I know. I feel that pressure even more than you do. But everyone here joined up of their own free will. They all knew the risks of siding with us. They stay because they believe in our mission. It wouldn't have been right to deny them this chance." He spread his arms and gestured toward the crowd around them. "The boost to our morale alone was worth it. When was the last time you saw everyone so excited?" Amberly looked around. Caspian was right. She couldn't recall the last time she had seen so many smiling faces. Conversations were rapid and cheerful, and the usual shouting was punctuated by regular sparks of laughter. Amberly smiled thinly and shrugged. "I guess you're right," she said. "Sorry for being the stick in the mud."
"Somebody's gotta be," Caspian replied. "So, still mad?" Amberly chuckled and threw a playful punch at his shoulder.
"I can never stay mad at you, Caspian," she said. "I've known you too long. That's the trouble. Just tell me one thing."
"Anything."
"You're positive that we haven't bitten off more than we can chew?"
Caspian grinned with as much confidence as he could muster. "Let them throw whatever they want at us. We'll make them wish they'd never set foot on our little rock."